With all the renewed interest and excitement around the work of Film is Fabulous, a newly formed charity formed by John Franklin, and the tantalising possibility of announcements of missing episodes of Doctor Who being identified, retrieved, and restored, it is illuminating to take ourselves back to the heady days of late 1970s and early 1980s, when rumours abound, shock revelations have emerged of destruction of episodes, collectors openly boasting about their collections and hoards at conventions. Now we have the former editor of Skaro magazine, Simon Lydiard, on, always wise and informative and good value. He will highlight some of the revealing information that he was reporting on in early 1983. We will also take a look at the early work of Sue Malden in the BBC archives, with her partnership now being with Film is Fabulous to help in archiving, cataloguing and retrieval of BBC lost material. Remember the 1982 winter special and reading about all that was going on within the BBC to our valued show? Well, must get our friend on, Simon. Good to see you, Simon.
And you, Brendan. And I guess the answer in a sense is 42, because that's how many years it is since I first started writing about missing episodes.
Yeah, this is a very long expose. This is so we'll introduce everybody to it. But it's fascinating, I have to say. So there's the two relevant magazines that you were editing at the time. And we're going to show the material, and it'll raise a few issues and names and titles, and it'll add to the pot, because I've got a few viewers who are actually, they're wanting to get every little clue and morsel they can, and fair enough, and join the dots. But sometimes you need to go way back. So welcome back to the Sensephere, Simon. Now, is all this missing episodes talk, Simon, getting you salivating or ruminating about those heady days at conventions and Doctor Who groups, when it seems some fans openly talked of missing episodes?
Both, I guess. I mean, I am incredibly excited to think that we're going to be discovering some more missing episodes of Doctor Who. I think that's amazing. It's such a long time since the last finds, and anything we can get. Of course, I've got my favourites, but anything we can get would be amazing. But yeah, it's true. Sort of in the particularly in the early 1980s, people did talk about missing episodes being hoarded, what they had. And one of the things, I guess, at the time was it was relatively soon after we started to understand that the BBC had junked some episodes. So it wasn't that long ago that we heard that. And we were never really quite sure what existed in the archives and what didn't. And so any talk about people having episodes, old episodes, was really, really interesting, and created kind of discussion about, were missing episodes not in the archives being held by fans.
And of course, if we date these magazines, this is early 1983. And we all know, because Sue Malden said it in that winter special, up to 1972, the BBC held every Doctor Who episode. Up to 1972. 11 years later, you're reporting on who's got them in their cupboard, who's boasting about it. And you're thinking, gosh, what a decade of dear disaster. So let's not tease anyone. We'll show parts of your article, and then I think it'll open up the debate about titles and people and what fans get up to. So of course it is a heady time, and it is down to Film is Fabulous and that. So here we go. This is the first morsel. This is obviously penned by your fair hand. And I won't read it all, but just to give everybody a taster, how would you react if I said that the missing 4th episode of 10th Planet was still in existence, or that the whole of Macra Terror was still around? I suspect like you, like me, would be very pleased. However, I'm sure that your pleasure, like mine, would be rapidly dissipated when you heard that these episodes were not, in fact, in the BBC archives. Now, what were you on to, Simon, here?
It was an attempt at the time to, without naming anyone, and I'm kind of still not going to, it was an attempt to out a particular fan who allegedly had a number of episodes. I'm not really quite sure. I mean, I heard this from a number of sources. if I did this nowadays in a kind of podcast, people would they might react, but they wouldn't be, it wouldn't create a sense of aggression. But this did at the time. And it also resulted in me getting a phone call from a fairly well-known Doctor Who episode collector who was really angry with me. But of course, episode 4, and that 10th Planet episode 4 was known to have been loaned to the Blue Peter studios, and they included a clip of it on a show. So it was known to exist in the, I don't know, guess late 70s, early 80s. It was known to exist. And between its loan to the BBC Blue Peter studios and its intended return to the archives, it seemed to disappear. And the pretty strong rumor at the time was that it disappeared into the hands of a Doctor Who fan who had access to the BBC. Where I got the idea about the macro terror, I really can't remember, but I guess it must have been an issue at the time. I suppose the question is, how many macro had you seen? Well, none at the time.
Yeah. So you were when I say you, I mean we had a good chat ages ago about the Lonleat 1983 convention, where you lived just around the corner really from it.
Yeah.
So we're all from different parts of the country. Sometimes you're in a better position to have a couple of connections on networks or groupings. So when we take you back to being a fan all those years ago, were you connected to different Doctor Who groupings who were openly talking about Hoards or having seen something?
Yes. I mean, this actually goes back to the time when, of course, we didn't have easy access to previous Doctor Who episodes. In the early 1980s, domestic video recorders were coming into use. Lots of Doctor Who fans or their parents purchased video recorders, and we could record off-air episodes that were being broadcast. But there was also a sort of network of people swapping and collecting old episodes on videotape and also on audio tape. Lots of the Hartnell episodes and Trident episodes. Those of us who kind of wanted to re-experience them in some audio or visual way were swapping audio cassettes, often many generations down, to the extent that you were listening to something that was meant to be, one of the episodes from Dalek Master Plan, and all you heard was rumbling noises. You couldn't even hear any dialogue. And at that stage, whilst we were swapping our audio cassettes and video cassettes, there were rumors of missing episodes, circulating in those sort of environments, in those circles. I never did at that stage see any missing episodes, but yeah, they were strongly rumored to exist, and the particular people were named, and they were people who we knew had access to the BBC and potentially could have gained access to those episodes. But yeah, my attempt was to try and, well, to be blunt, and it's obvious in the article, to shame one particular person into returning episodes.
I mean, I'll show everybody the article, and then I will, without us giving a name, I will ask you a couple of questions about what, because it is 42 years later. So yeah. This was your setup. And of course, I'm just cross-referencing to everybody. 10th Planet Part 4 does not exist in entirety. The Macro Terror, not at all. Those two mentioned by Simon, having heard as an examples. So we continue with this. I will just clear the decks here so we can actually see it, and I'll go a bit bigger there. Right. The revelations of the facts would no doubt make this person much despised by many Doctor Who fans if that person's name were to be revealed. However, I feel I would be doing a greater service to Doctor Who fandom by withholding the name and suggesting a course of action, which is obviously what Simon was relating to there. Sue Malden of the BBC Archives has more or less guaranteed impunity. She mentions that in so many interviews. She's mentioned it again about within Film is Fabulous, saying the BBC have continued that trend and are pretty welcoming now, and there's going to be no argy-bargy about copyright, all the rest of it. So that's been the situation for decades. And so, of course, it's a plea from Simon there, and your open letter in a way continues. You suggest a course of action, and because we've just had the Five Faces season at that point, it will be much welcomed and highly successful, to do that. So you've given it the context, and then you finish like this. Again, I address myself directly to this mysterious person who I have saved from embarrassment by refusing to name. If you really care for Doctor Who and its fans, you have only one course of action open to you. That's outlined above. Now, knowing that that's what the course of action you recommended in 1983, and as you said at the beginning, we are 42 years later, has that course of action been taken by that person?
I know that, or I understand that one episode that had been returned to the BBC had been returned from a private collector. These were, and one of the reasons why this got me into quite a lot of heated discussion with other Doctor Who fans at the time was I couldn't prove any of this.
Yeah.
So these were based on discussions. They were based on suggestions, sources, rumours. It isn't something that I can provide proof of. So I'm pretty sure that one episode that had been returned to the BBC has been returned by a Doctor Who fan who had been hoarding it for some time. Whether the 10th Planet episode 4 or Macroterra exists, I don't know. Those were the rumours at the time. There were pretty strong reasons to suggest that 10th Planet episode 4 existed, which I've outlined. The Macroterra, I just cannot recall why I mentioned that, or maybe it was just an example. I don't know.
Yeah. So that's the open letter, and let's be honest, we know there are certain people who had access to the BBC, had certain influence in the BBC. Even BBC producers in different departments were aware of stuff. And here's an example. I had Simon Anthony on, and he worked in the video editing department. And during my interview with him, he just said this at the end. It was in relation to colorization, but he explained one or two of their practices that they did, and they were just video editors. Here we go.
The Terror of the Autons, Ambassadors of Death, and one other tape which Ian Levine had managed to get from America, from Canada, from a bloke who wanted to watch Doctor Who and had got a Betamax and who had recorded a transmission that had been transmitted on a U-matic from a university just over the border. That U-matic was a 525 colour copy that had been converted from 625 to 525. Now, clever old BBC wiped the 625 masters in the device known as the fish fryer, and we had, though, got film recordings, black and white versions that had been used for selling Doctor Who to countries that didn't have any colour television equipment. And that meant that we had the story was complete, but no colour. So me and my friend Keith Hunter, who got the tapes from Ian Levine, thought, how about we try and stick the colour back on the black and white by basically getting a vision mixer, because we didn't have any digital systems. They hadn't been invented really. And we had a bloke, I can't remember how, but a bloke called Peter Lydiard White, who had worked on the Hartnell story, the Toy Master, and he was delighted. He thought it was marvelous, fantastic, glorious. He saw it and then he went away, and we thought, oh, things are going to happen. They did. He had a heart attack. which I'm glad to say he recovered from. And the process of getting those tapes was one which could have got us sacked. Quite easily could have done. And people
Now
had
you
done. A
mentioned
bloke called Jan Vincent Rudsky, I think, was sacked.
they were doing stuff that, yeah. So you see what I mean? This is just people in different departments for good reason. They're wanting to colorize. They're trying to, help the situation before the BBC were even interested in colorization. However, the point still stands. They were taking tapes from the BBC. You can just guarantee in any practice like this would all be returned. And this is it. I mean, it's a detective's nightmare, really. But there were certain names mentioned there. Certain people who seem to kind of find things in lots of different places. So, yes, I will just say Ian Levine was mentioned there twice by Simon Anthony. I didn't even know where we were going to take that turn in the discussion. And so it's interesting, isn't it? So I thought that would just kind of nicely dovetail with what you're talking about regarding people who have access to the BBC who might just take a tape or, whatever.
I think, yeah, I mean, one of the sort of origins of this story is the Lively Arts documentary in 1977, the documentary that the BBC made, a very prestigious documentary, to celebrate 15 years of Doctor Who, which included lots of clips. And as I understand it, those clips were produced on film and given to the Lively Arts documentary series producers. And of course, those clips were from films that the BBC had. But they were, my understanding is that those clips then ended up in the possession of a fan. Now, we're not talking there about that fan hoarding missing episodes. Those weren't missing episodes. Those were film duplicates from films that the BBC already had. But they seem to add to the idea that there was at least one person, maybe several, who were collecting bits of Doctor Who, and the story grew around it that there was more than those bits of film that actually were simply copies of the stuff BBC already had. That this person or persons had more than that.
It's interesting because the detective work is simple. When I talk to Philip Morris as an example, and I've talked a little bit to John Franklin from Film is Fabulous, he talks about the caution of private collectors. He talks about it's a sensitive process.
Yeah.
That they're a lot older now. They're in their 80s and 90s. They fear what happened to Bob Monkhouse. They're very careful. And actually, in some cases, they don't know what's in their collection anymore.
Yeah.
And that's the situation. And when I mentioned the stereotype to Philip Morris of private collectors, the stereotype that they see it almost as a trophy, something to boast about. It's an ego trip for some to kind of just, throw their influence around. That was my perception as a kid of these Doctor Who fans who seem to just have their mitts on everything and seem to be in the loop, and they've seen some of these missing episodes. That was my perception. Philip Morris cut me dead there and said that's not his perception and his work in practice of the private collectors he works with. But then I come to what you've been saying from your work in the early 1980s. Doctor Who fans are openly talking about what they've got or what they've seen or what they've heard somebody's got. In other words, somebody's got a mouth, which is the opposite of the picture I'm told about these very cautious, quiet, So,
yeah.
So I'm doing detective work and thinking of people who I have come across in the Doctor Who fandom who have a mouth. I'm just trying to...
Okay. I mean, another thing happened back then, which is that, these discussions were going on. People were either boasting or suggesting what they had. Another thing which people did back in the early 1980s was wandering, at Doctor Who conventions, wander around the convention with videotapes that had sort of even the Daleks on the edge of it. I mean, they clearly weren't.
Yeah.
But that went on as well. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I can imagine. I mean, it's a yeah. You want to be my friend. Yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, I mean, I will. I've mentioned this to you before, Brendan, but actually, I did actually return something to the BBC myself, which is that I came across the film sound recordings from Monster Pelodon. A friend of mine. It's almost the classic tale. They rescued from a BBC skip
Yeah.
uh, audio reel audio tapes of the film it on, which I guess was at Ealing Studios. Um, that they obtained them, um, gave me a copy, and then I returned it to the BBC. I went back to my friend and said, you know, could we have the original? Because he had the original reel-to-reel tapes, and he had destroyed them. And the reason he had destroyed them is that fear,
Yeah.
that if the BBC found he had what was technically, you know, their property, that he would be prosecuted. So unfortunately, the original audio reel from the filming of Monster Pedal is gone, but fortunately, I had a very high quality video cassette, audio cassette copy taken from that reel. I returned it to the BBC. At the time, I was living in Bath, and BBC Audio had their studios in Bath. Michael Stevens was running it.
Mm.
So I returned um, this copy of the audio to the BBC, and I think they released it, or at least some of it, on they did a series of called Doctor Who at the BBC, a series of CDs
Yes.
at the
Yeah.
time. I think some of it is on one of those releases, but in any case, and I can't remember what the length of it was, that audio recording was returned to the BBC by me.
It's all contributions. I mean, it. I know Jeremy TARDIS Travels. He's added little bits and bobs from clips and various things over the time. It's amazing what people, even like you said, audio recordings. They fill some of the gaps. Now, before we move on to your second Skaro magazine, I'm imagining the viewers, and I'm gonna go a bit journalistic now, or more Inspector Clouseau maybe. But basically, I'm going to say to you, okay, before we move on, that first article you mentioned, 10th Planet Part 4 Macroterror. You've explained that you can't quite remember why you maybe referenced the second one.
Yeah.
You've never seen them. You've never seen a missing episode. You've got no evidence for either of those, although I've heard what you said about the 10th Planet Part 4, and that there was an understanding that that was a tape that was passed for the Blue Peter studio. Blah, blah, blah. Okay, so we're confirming that you haven't seen or anything of those two. It was just at a convention, at groups, you heard. Okay, right, just to confirm as we go through. Right, obviously this dovetails very nicely with, we are all waiting patiently. Film is Fabulous are trying to do the hard work. We're just trying to say, can you give us the headlines? But of course they've got to do hundreds and hundreds of hours of work first. And of course, Sue Malden, it's interesting because Sue Malden, of course, comes all the way through her history from BBC Archives and is now helping them. And she's actually part of the trustees. And she made a few references to Doctor Who Recoveries, and this is why John Franklin rushed out a statement when he didn't quite at this point have all his ducks in a row, as he said, but he knows that it's always a bushfire in Doctor Who. So as far as Doctor Who goes, we do not have a statement or anything to make at the moment. We do know fairly certainly that there are episodes missing in private collections, and I'll say a little bit more about that as we go through. But in your second edition, following on, basically, so that was issue 3, this is issue 4,
Yeah.
you continued, and it was the letters page. There were 2 letters, weren't there, that had some interesting comments. So I know there's people watching, and they've got a sheet, and they're keeping all these cross references. Now, the title of this letter, I think you're making, is only 20 Doctor Who episodes actually missing. Was that the understanding at the time, or was that the talk?
This is what this person I think was suggesting. So this was an anonymous letter. When I published the first article, I got really a lot of kickback, pretty aggressive kickback from some fans, and I mean, I frankly thought that what I'd done was pretty naive. I probably shouldn't have done it. Then this letter came in. They were claiming that a couple of episodes, the missing episodes of the invasion, existed. What they also claimed was that we were never going to see Tomb of the Cybermen again. It was gone for good. Absolutely never going to see it. And remarkably, I think 9 years later, we saw it. David Stead, who worked at the BBC at the time, managed to recover those 4 episodes of Tomb of the Cybermen, and they, as I recall, that when David found them and was in the process of returning them to the BBC, they almost went lost again in transit. So they were almost kind of recovered and then lost again, but fortunately we saw them. But yeah, there was a suggestion that there were only 20 missing episodes of Doctor Who. Again, I'm going to kind of do the disclaimer. I don't know any of that for fact.
Yeah,
I published this letter. It was written anonymously, and that was the suggestion that there were only 20 missing episodes. But of course, this person claimed amongst those 20 missing episodes was Tomb of the Cybermen.
Yes, it's one of those, isn't it? You're going, what's the authenticity of this? Of course, I get anonymous contributions now. Some of them, maybe because they're just embarrassed, but 1 or 2 of my anonymous sources explain why they want to be anonymous, and they authenticate a bit more. And actually, they've got fingers in pies, and so it's interesting. So yeah, I mean, you've summarised it well, but yes. You'd be glad to hear episodes 1 and 4 of Invasion still exist. Now, if I show you on our chart, on the latest one, the Invasion, as you will see, episodes 1 and 4 are missing. They're animated only. So that's what was said there. And then, of course, as you said, they said, it's fair to say, however, that Tomb is definitely missing. So they kind of go into that kind of detail there. And then this amazing statement about 20 Doctor Who episodes actually missing. Mind you, at one point, like we said, in 1972, there were none missing. So it'll have been an incremental thing anyway. Now, they carry on. Let me just kind of free up the thing. Yes. Although he does sometimes show them to others. Oh, sorry, let me get this right. I apologise. There's a sentence I need to kind of link up, don't I? There is no reason why he shouldn't give these back. He could still see them. And although he does sometimes show them to others, the tapes may gain a wider view and if returned to the BBC, e.g. the recently returned colour Terror of the Autons is probably to be shown at Longleat. If this simpering worm would care to return these episodes, I for one would retract any statement I made on him. But until that day, I think this person is a little bit selfish.
Yeah, it's interesting though, Brendan, looking at that, because I sometimes printed quite strong opinions in Skaro. And they were not necessarily, they weren't always opinions I agreed with, but I did print pretty strong stuff. But it was nothing compared to the sort of strength of opinion and attitudes later expressed in a magazine which became known as DWB, originally Doctor Who Bulletin, Dreamworld Bulletin later. Yeah, some of the stuff I printed back then was reasonably mild compared to what came later.
Yeah, so that's an anonymous letter.
Yeah,
but folks, there's a second one, and this person does put their name to it. So to be fair, there we go, Neville Watkins. Yeah. So finally, I must comment on your opinion column and the extremely exciting prospect of missing episodes surviving in the hands of a private collector. Dare we hope that sometime in the future we might see Tomb of the Cybermen?
Yes, we dare.
Yeah, we can. We can. I can hardly bring myself to believe it. You seem very certain that this mysterious collector does have Macro Terror and 10th Planet Episode 4. Can you be that certain? How much is fact and how much rumour? Why has it only come to light now? Of course, I would love it to be true, but these things could just as easily prove a terrible letdown. Let's hope that it's not this case this time. What better time could be the And let's just go. May I just add that you were quite right not to name the guilty party. Let's try diplomacy and gentle persuasion. Now, as I have said, 42 years later, one question I've got for Simon, who obviously is diplomatic. Right, if the art of diplomacy hasn't worked in 42 years, Simon, did you in those 42 years reference that name that you suspected to Sue Malden?
No. And interesting, you comment on my diplomacy because I am a former diplomat.
Yes, yes.
But no, I didn't. But Sue Malden would know who I was referring to.
It sounds like nearly everybody does.
Yeah.
Yes. This is the thing. So yeah, and she'll have done. I'm sure she'll have done due diligence, knowing.
Yeah, I mean, it was a person that would have been known to Sue Malden, so those conversations would have taken place. So either that person didn't have those episodes, and my rumours were utterly scurrilous, which is a possibility, or they still have them.
Yeah. And it's also a possibility that people, like you said, even with the joke or evil of the Daleks under the arm,
yeah,
you can get kudos for pretending and bluffing, of course. And I think there'll be a lot of that in Doctor Who fandom as well over the years, a lot of bluff and bluster as well. So I'll just throw that into the works. So yes, there we go. Two responses there. I think let's have a look. And so yes, you were aware of the debate 40 odd years ago as this really kicked off, because that winter special, I remember in that Doctor Who magazine, and you've mentioned the earlier Lively Arts documentary, the concern that suddenly we have blanks in the Doctor Who archives really did shock everybody. And we've become much more vigilant now to what's out there. But unfortunately, and I think the greatest advocate around in those days clearly was Sue Malden. And this article was brilliant in how she took us through about how they're trying to look after everything, the special climate needed, etc. She went into a fair bit of detail about how many episodes were missing at that point. 417 of the 550 episodes transmitted to date reside here. So we were missing at that point 136. We're now down to 97. But in a way, I don't know if I'm disappointed or not. I mean, we've had some great hauls, and Philip Morris as Enemy of the World, etc. But 39 episodes in 42 years is like, God, that's hard going.
It is hard going, and let's not forget that Philip Morris also recovered initially the whole of Web of Fear, only for one episode again to go missing in transit. So that episode potentially is still around. I just want to take you back as well, because we've mentioned Tomb of the Cybermen a few times, and for many years it was assumed to be lost. That letter from Skaro that you quoted said, yeah, it's definitely lost. We're never going to see it again. It got recovered, and I've mentioned that was a bit of a dodgy recovery in the sense of it almost went missing again.
Yeah.
Something strange happened as well, which maybe people these days might not be able to relate to, but for my generation of Doctor Who fans, our way of reliving many of the old Doctor Who stories was to read the Target books. And so we had in our minds versions of Doctor Who stories which were, created in our minds by reading the novelizations. And when Tomb of the Cybermen was returned, before we actually saw it, because it came out on videotape, on VHS, there was a big debate about whether it was going to be a massive letdown, whether what we had in our minds, our view of what Tomb of the Cybermen might look like, this fantastic Triton classic, when we came to see it, would it be a letdown? Well, I've got to say, for me, it definitely wasn't. I thought it was amazing. I was delighted to see it. But there were still people saying, well, actually, it was a bit of a letdown because we thought it would look greater. So that's an interesting part of the debate, which maybe people nowadays would not have twigged.
Yeah, I mean, when I've had some speculative shows, deliberate, just speculative shows, to enjoy the enthusiasm as we have as Doctor Who fans, I've made it clear that actually we might be all wanting that Marco Polo, whatever, but actually it might be space pirates that actually, if it's retrieved, might end up being seen as great because it's Robert Holmes after all. But Marco Polo worries me sick. If they ever did find it, you worry that it was studio bound. There's been so much love and craving for it that it almost, I don't think you can live up to the expectation. And it's a good book as well.
It's a good book, and there's two other things about Marco Polo, which is, one, it was directed by Waris Hussein.
Yeah.
So we've got high hopes of it because of that. And another thing is that, I mentioned the idea that we form these ideas of what the stories might look like from reading the target books. But with Marco Polo, there are quite a number of on-set, beautiful color photographs.
Yeah.
So we've got an idea of it based on those color photographs. And obviously, if we ever do see it, and I really hope we do, but if we ever do see it, it's going to be black and white 405 line, and from film filmed off of a television monitor. So it's not going to look like what we've got in our mind's eye.
No, and this is it. I was just playing around with War Machines earlier for a little daft cliffhanger, and I can see how the footage of War Machines Part 2 in certain shots of the War Machine is much grainier, and you can see there's different levels. And when I was talking to Philip Morris the other day, he was talking about, well, number one, I asked him about Web of Fear Part 3.
Yeah.
And he did say, that was somebody had their eye on what he was doing with transport and got in there first. Second thing is, I said, well, do you have a good inkling who has Web of Fear Part 3? The affirmative came within seconds. Yes, he has a very good idea who has that copy, and it does exist. So there's hope for that one. And yes, I mean, I think that, they all talk to each other. He's advising if they need it, as he said. He's reached out to Film is Fabulous. You can see here Sue Malden and John Nathan and Turner had been trying to preserve Sharda, the unseen material at that point. Obviously, we ended up seeing a bit of it, and so there came Johnny Come Lately. When she took up the position, she said, yes, there were issues with the black and whites missing then. And then there was an absolute muck-up of one of the John Pertwee's Invasion of the Dinosaurs when that was an absolute accident.
Yes.
Yeah. So, I know, as you say, things can be mistaken. Things can just go wrong. Things can go walkies. Every big organisation has these issues. The more staff you've got, the more people who have access to tapes at certain points in a process. It is a can of worms. So Sue Malden obviously reminded us, and I think this is the issue all the way through that's been the problem, that because there was this contract with BBC Enterprises, that the contract was once you'd shown the show and everything, it would be returned. If they forget to return it and they still had it, would people abroad or companies junk it rather than being breach of contract with the BBC, which is technically what there would have been by still holding it. So she says, what do I do? Send a stroppy letter to them as a member of the BBC saying, have you still got a copy? She mentioned that they found better copies of The Spearhead from Space. And Sue Malden's made various references and examples of luck and hard work. So this example is the pilot episode of An Unearthly Child that we all know. They changed it between what was seen that time and once the big wigs had a discussion about it, but she talked about the takeoff sound effect is now preserved forever because of actually getting that first copy. Various things like that. She also explains to us that the Webberfear Part 1 was luckily retrieved. On one visit to BBC Enterprises, she passed a whole pile of cans recently returned from an overseas sale. Chancing to glance at the can on the top, Sue was astonished to find it containing the first episode of the Troughton classic, The Web of Fear. And, you know, when I was talking to Philip Morris about this, he said it, luckily, he said the 5 he retrieved had a better print quality than Part 1 there. But, you know, at that point, Part 1 didn't exist at all. And of course, she's just mentioned how difficult it was legally then. She mentions as another example, discovering in Canada the Curse of Peladon and the Time Monster with a different kind of quality of colour tape. And so, you know, there's been a lot done. And this is fascinating, actually, Simon, when you see that this was in 1982. And this is what they were saying was the situation regarding our precious missing and existing Doctor Who episodes. I was really looking forward to doing this cross-referencing exercise earlier, and actually I felt a little bit gutted afterwards because I thought not too much has changed, you know, not too much. Where you see the nuns, yeah, we've maybe added one if we're lucky. I know we've added a couple of Wheel in Space now. Yeah, that's not too much has changed at all. It's a bleak picture in that respect, which is why, as I've gone through this, I have been very keen to promote the Film is Fabulous people for what they're starting to do. And did you listen to the podcast, by the way, Simon, about the missing episodes? Not mine. I mean the Doctor Who, the Missing Episodes podcast.
I have. I'm not sure if I listen to the specific one. I do sometimes listen to their podcast.
Yeah. You will be very, very happy with the announcements when they come, is what he asserted. Now that, I mean, as you can see, it's the linguistic exercise, isn't it? Why are you intensifying very, you know?
Well, that sounds like it's more than 2, which is what some people are suggesting. So let's hope so.
Well, let me try and I'm not here just to cheer you up. I'm trying to. This is the page that's doing all the heavy work for me, Simon. He said this: we are aware of several collectors, plural, with several episodes of Doctor Who that are missing from the archive, plural, that are in private collections and with former industry professionals. So I know what you are saying you've heard. And when you look at that, I mean, I was very clear to people following me. Several, if you go to the Cambridge Dictionary definition.
Okay.
Yeah. The most common interpretation is the bottom one there, 3 to 5, depending on person's measuring of you know, how they do it. So, you know, I did a show where basically people were saying, well, if he really means several collectors, that's at least 3. With several episodes, that's 3 again. That's 9. And we were starting to play.
Okay. And of course, you never know if they might come across one collector who has absolutely no idea of the value of what they had and has got 20 episodes. You just don't know.
Well, I've said that about the Avengers and various things, that part of their job is to advise collectors on obviously the state of the collection, to archive it for them if they want, and to catalogue it and maybe keep a copy at the BBC archives. They've been doing that for a while, but also to advise the collector on any items of rarity, and to advise them or recommend to them to return them to the rights holders. And they serve as that conduit. So yeah, it's good work, but as I say, I find it sounds promising what they're saying. Since 2023, Film is Fabulous have been aware of a large collection of films, thousands of films that have become vulnerable. That collection contains some very important material, including a missing episode of Doctor Who.
Gosh, yeah.
So, and that's why we all have to learn patience, because if a collection is vulnerable, the priorities and have to go into that, and it's not about where's the Doctor Who bit. As he said, I'm not going to pick out stuff. He said it's about preserving a collection.
I think we've got to understand the difference between our deep, possibly unhealthy obsession with one particular program and the people whose aim is to recover and preserve historic film footage. Their job is their interest, and their job is different to our interest. They will serve our interest, but their primary job is not to recover episodes of Doctor Who. They have a much broader, I guess, historical preservation role than that.
Yes, and John Franklin was very frank with me. He did actually say, film is my first love. He said, Doctor Who not. And actually, that's healthy to me. I think that's true. Yeah. It's cultural history, it's television and cinematic history. Doctor Who's part of that. And so I fully understand. And let's face it, I'm glad that I always try and reaffirm that people should back off from this charity, because they went into it because they had a passion. It was a passion project. They love cinema.
Yeah.
They love, they love the whole visceral experience. That
Yeah.
they don't want the harassment from a niche group of people, which is a byproduct of what they do. Television is not them. Yeah.
We have to be careful that we don't come across to them as a kind of swarm of buzzing gnats. Leave them to do their job. We will hopefully get what we are waiting for.
Yeah. And he's tried his best. He's had to make a statement when he didn't want to make a statement. There is a possibility that there are other episodes of Doctor Who in that collection where there's one. But at this moment in time, we know of one. I think that's pretty transparent. And so, yeah, I mean, it's you can only imagine how many hundreds of hours this takes. When he texted me the other day on Friday, he said the whole weekend was going to private collections and cataloguing. And, I mean, that's the full... And, of course, cross-referencing, you don't always recognise what's in the can and the title might not reflect what's in the, on the film. If you don't recognise the film, it then has to be sent to various places. It just takes... And, of course, you've got to protect it in transportation. But as he said, since 2023, Film is Fabulous have returned almost 100 missing, rare and superior condition prints to the BBC archive.
That's amazing. That's amazing.
That's quite a haul. You can see that's John Franklin there with the current Sue Malden, so to speak. I've got her name up here and I'll give you it in a second. But basically, she's the head of BBC Archives now. And you can see there, he is returning softly. Yeah. So, yeah, we might be Doctor Who fans, but if Softly is getting returned, if various others are getting returned, they're all of a certain palette, and you think, okay, this sounds promising.
Yeah. I mean, I've got interest in other programs as well. I'd be delighted if they could find more episodes of Hancock's Half Hour.
Oh, yes. Yes, it was an exciting... The 60s, of course. I mean, you can imagine there was some real great experimental stuff on all TV, and to try and find parts of it. They've only got, in the BBC archive, still only one episode of Simon D's D-Time. Anyway, recovery of Captain Pugwash.
Brilliant.
So, I mean, they are doing the whole lot. And so I'll just remind everybody, if you do wish to make a donation, it is filmisfabulous.org.uk. It is a charity now. That makes that process a bit easier for them. They've got an awful lot of admin to sort out because they've been a charity registered for a week, but they're still carrying on with their work. If you want your Doctor Who episodes back, we all need to give our support to these people. So, Simon, it has been fascinating hearing about your kind of context of the 70s, 80s period when you were a wee Doctor Who fan and you were hearing things I wasn't hearing. I was only jealously kind of thinking, where do all these Doctor Who fans meet? So, I mean, Do you think there were leads then? It's just that you don't pick up on at the time. You know, you're too busy enjoying life and stuff. Do you think there were possibilities then that there were, for example, I always had this idea that people sometimes met up and watched a missing episode, but it's a hush hush little group and all that stuff.
Yes, there was a suggestion of that, and lots of Doctor Who fans did. Of course, back in those days, I was one of the earlier members of the Doctor Who Appreciation Society that was founded in 1976. And then 2 years after that, 78, I formed the Bath local group of the Doctor Who Appreciation Society. And there were local groups all over the country. And we did used to meet up regularly. And wouldn't have been in 78 because domestic video recorders, although they existed, they weren't widespread. But a few years later than that, we would meet up and watch episodes. Obviously not missing episodes in the case of the Bath local group. I make that clear. But yeah, there was a suggestion that other people were watching missing episodes. But I kind of, try to repeatedly make it clear in this, Brendan, that I'm not trying to suggest that I know more than I'm letting on. They were rumours which I picked up on.
Exactly, and you're in a position to share them, and then you're in a position to get some feedback on what some people thought anonymously. And good old Neville Watkins. Personally speaking, though, as Doctor Who fans, we are all trying to be so careful. Oh, I will appreciate anything coming back. But personally speaking, Simon, what would really be the golden shot for you if they said they'd return?
Well, it probably isn't the best story, but Wheel in Space means a lot to me, because Wheel in Space is one of the earliest stories that I can recall watching. And I was just absolutely fascinated by the Cybermen in those eggs, those spheres. I remember seeing those on broadcast, and I would have been only about probably 4 or 5 years old at the time. But to be able to watch my earliest memories of Doctor Who as a full story, that would be amazing.
Yeah. Does it, for example, when they do return, in my case, it's not returning stuff as from missing, it's just seeing it on video when we never thought we'd see it again. That kind of experience. Revenge of the Cybermen when it came out.
Yeah.
My concern was is this going to trample on my memories?
Yeah.
You want it back, of course. We want. But then the fear is, am I going to erode the memories? And I watched Talons of Cheyenne on iPlayer now for the umpteenth time, and I'm thinking, am I just erasing all childhood memories? So, is your fear that if Whale in Space came back, you'd play it to death, and the link would go a bit?
No, I think one of the things that having this unhealthy obsession with Doctor Who has taught me is an understanding and appreciation of film and television. If I were able to see, and I probably got my age a bit wrong, I was probably 6 at the time. If I were able to see Wheel in Space again now, I would understand I was watching a piece of 1968 television, and my expectations of what 1968 television would be like are based on decades of watching and understanding old TV and being fascinated by it. I wouldn't be comparing the Wheel in Space in 68 with what 2001: A Space Odyssey looks like, which came out that same year. So no, I think having this obsession, this interest, and following it so deeply, reading about it, investigating it, it gives you an understanding of what television has been like over the decades. So no, I think, and of course there are 2 episodes of Wheel in Space already in existence, which we can watch, and I do watch them. So no, I think I've got an appreciation of historic television.
Final thing here, because we're Doctor Who fans. what actually got you to reattached and hooked to that program out of all the things? Now, I'm thinking of your age and what you've just referenced there. Were you one of those who witnessed the monster season, for example?
Yes.
So basically, I'm trying to guess, was it the fact that it was just all these monsters? I was always scared. I was Genesis of the Daleks, that kind of period, giant spiders on your back, So you
Yeah.
can imagine I was gripped, sea devils coming out the water. So what was it that grabbed you about Doctor Who in those early formative years?
A couple of things. Well, first of all, unfortunately, I no longer have it, but there was a photograph of me, probably about 5 years old, chewing on a Dalek money box, which probably had lead paint on it, so that maybe explains quite a lot. So I've obviously been watching Doctor Who since I was probably about 5 years old, and I obviously enjoyed it enough for my parents to buy me a Dalek money box then. It was two things. Yes, it was the monsters, which I thought I loved monsters, and later on I kind of got an appreciation of horror films as well. So, in particular, the Universal horror films of the 1940s. But of course, the first Doctor that I can remember is Patrick Troughton.
Mm,
And Patrick Troughton's performance as the Doctor, kind of, I guess the combination of that and the monsters is what made me a fan. There's something, I mean, I don't like to criticize other Doctors, and I enjoy them all. And of them all, Tom Baker is my favorite. But Patrick Troughton, his performance is absolutely magical. I think when you watch him,
mm,
he's not like a typical hero in a TV program, and very often his Doctor isn't front and center. He's very often in the background, and sometimes he was frightened. His Doctor was
mm,
frightened, and I just think it. There's a kind of almost like a wizard character to Troughton's Doctor, just deeply fascinating, very, very thoughtful. Um, I think he was a character that children could relate to
mm, mm,
and be fascinated by, and I certainly was. I absolutely loved Troughton's Doctor, and from that on, I was hooked on it. And from Pertwee's time, I would say I would really genuinely characterize myself as a fan, to the extent that when I was at junior school, my best friend then, still is my best friend, Julian Chislett, after 55 years or so, we created our own Doctor Who scrapbooks at junior school. So we became real fans back then.
it doesn't leave you. That is definite. That is
Yeah.
definite. So, I mean, it's fascinating to hear, and it's lovely to always hear the different stories. I mean, we've talked about the missing episodes, brouhaha, so to speak, but do you know the Five Faces of Doctor Who, which you referenced in your Skaro magazine?
Yeah.
To me, they were like missing episodes because I knew nothing about them really at that age. And when you've just mentioned Patrick Troughton, I think the big find in the Five Faces of Doctor Who for me, I was waiting to see William Hartnell, of course, but I was mesmerized by Patrick Troughton in the Crotons. Absolutely
Mm.
mesmerized. There is something about how he delivered his lines, his manner. So I can hear what you're saying, and it resonates with me too. Oh, let's hope we find some more Troughton there.
Let's hope so.
Yeah, well, this has been obviously it's a pleasure for me, and it'll be a pleasure for the viewers. It's lovely talking to you again, Simon, and I hope I can get you on again. Availability, and all the rest of it, being one of those things we keep an eye on. But yeah, I mean, you did a fair few Skyrim magazines, didn't you? So there might be some little things we could trawl through. You never know. One day, little contextual material.
I've got copies of all of them, and I've also got, for most of them, I've got the original production files. So I've got all of the handwritten letters that people sent to me, and I've got the page layouts that I had at the time. So I've got my own preservation project for Skaro.
Oh, okay. Yes. Well, yeah. Well, if we can ever dip in our toes in and now and again and get a touch of that, because it's actually lovely contemporaneous notes and everything, really, isn't it? To just get that vibe. Um, in all this brouhaha now about missing episodes and speculation, it's interesting to just dive 4 decades ago, and it was the same old story, and maybe the same old names. Which is,
Some of them.
yeah. So anyway, good to see you. Look after yourself, Simon, and I hope
Yeah.
we get the pleasure again.
Thank you.